welcome to the Fox Trolley Museum's World War II weekend, and this is going to be a short, very short lecture on military medical programs that took place with the United States Department of Medical Services during the Second World War. We're going to dispel something first of all. They were not called medics. Not at all. The appropriate term is aid man. Derives from the term first aid man. Each platoon had at least one aid man. There are 3 platoons to a company, so therefore approximately 3 aid men to 75 to 80 individual soldiers. How did this start? Well, the United States Army in World War I really didn't have a medical department. It was considered fairly unnecessary. But with the battle carnage in World War I, the United States started to form the medical department. The medical department was a short, small department within the United States Army. It was considered very independent. In fact, when the Second World War broke out and you were an aid man in the field, you had 2 masters. The first was your company officer. You reported to him directly. The second was to the ranking officer of the medical department assigned to whatever regiment or division you belonged to. So therefore, if you were into a situation where the medical officer gave you an order and your company officer gave you an order, who are you going to listen to? Medical personnel carry no command authority. None. Their only position is within their own group. So it's very difficult to be an aid man. Extremely. And to be an aid man, you necessarily did not have to have a medical background. There were some aid men who were drafted into the Army who had worked in the Chicago stockyards. And the only reason they were drafted into the medical department was basically they had seen blood, seen flesh dismembered, and what is a soldier on a battlefield who's been wounded, but nothing more than a completely dismembered piece of flesh. That's the way they thought of this. Now, when you come into the Army, it's dependent upon what you can do. You are given a test as to where you might fit in, kind of like in the modern MOS system. But think about this. The United States has been attacked by Axis powers on December 7, 1941, which dragged America into the war, and the stupid Germans declared war on us when they didn't have to. Well, you have no real medical department. You have to bring these guys in. What's your opinion of somebody who cannot or will not pick up a weapon and fight when your country's been attacked? Obviously, there are words for people like that, and they're used. But because the United States was a signatory to the Second Geneva Convention, which stated that medical personnel are not allowed to carry offensive weaponry onto a field, well, we can't carry weapons. So while all these guys in the 1st Division are out there learning how to shoot and doing tactics and having a great time, I'm stuck in a classroom. I'm learning anatomy. I'm learning pharmacology. I'm learning everything there is to know about what I need to do on a battlefield and in the situation that I'm in. Obviously, when it comes time to go to town, guess who doesn't get invited? Because I'm not their buddy. I'm the guy who sits in the corner of the room. Well, that's not very good. Let us say, for the sake of time and everything, that we've gone through our field training. I've been assigned to a platoon, and now we are shipped overseas. Our overseas assignment is in England. So, we are transported to a place called Fort Dix, New Jersey, where we go through basic refitting, are placed on a freighter, and of course this is not a ship like a cruise ship is today. This is a freighter. There are bunks built into the holds 18 inches deep all the way to the top. And there are not enough bunks for everybody on the ship. So while people are up on deck, enjoying the deck, there are people in these bunks sleeping. And when it's their time to come down and sleep, the guys get out of the bunks, go back up to the deck, and the guys on the deck slide into these bunks. It's called hot bunking. The sheets and the bedding is never cold the entire trip overseas. It's always warm with somebody else's body heat. Think about how that feels. Well, let's say I get a soldier who comes up to me, and he says, I get seasick. I have a problem. What's the problem? If I go to an officer and get put on sick call, they're going to write down that I get seasick. Invasions are from the sea. They may not want me on a boat. I don't want that. I want to fight. So of course, I go into my stores and I pull out Dramamine tablets and I give them to this guy. Now all of a sudden I'm not so bad a guy. I'm kind of like starting to become a buddy here. Well, we get to England. We get off the boat in England. They put us on trucks. They ship us 60 miles north of London. For 6 months, we go into training. That training is preparing everybody to go into Normandy at the time. I also prepare. I need to know what my place is in the medical department and how it's going to work. As a field aid man, it's going to be a little different than a doctor or an orderly or anybody who works in the hospital system. My job is patch them up, move them on. It's quick. Well, after about, let's say, 6 months of being out in the field and not having any leave, we get a pass. Where are we going to go? We're going to go to London. And of course, the first place we're all going to hit, being good soldiers, is the local pub. Now, there's advantages and disadvantages to the local pub. One of the disadvantages is that the beer is served very warm. The advantage is it comes in pints, so you get lots more of it. Well, let us just say that our poor soldiers who have been down there are having a great time at this pub. The proprietor calls lights out, they leave, and one soldier leaves with a young lady. Her husband has been with Montgomery in North Africa now for a year. She hasn't heard from him. She doesn't know if he's alive or dead. He bought her a beer. She's cried on his shoulder and invites him up to her place. The next morning, he goes back to camp. 4 days later, he has the worst case of a venereal disease you ever had in your life. He didn't take precautions. So he has to go to a thing called a pro station. That's where we do all kinds of interesting things, which I don't think is fit for a camera, or for some of the younger members of your viewing audience here. But instead of going to a doctor, they're going to come to the medic. If they really don't want to get put on report, I'm going to tell them a secret. There are packets on these soldiers' belts. And in those packets is a Carlisle bandage, 10 wound tablets, and a powdered drug called sulfanilamide. It's also called everything from sulfa drug to Snuffy Smith, according to these soldiers. It is an antibiotic. It's a byproduct of aniline dye production that the Germans discovered before the war. It kills germs. So what I'm going to tell them is, you take that packet out, open it up, take the 10 wound tablets out, and you take one of those wound tablets every 2 hours until they're gone. Then come and see me in a couple of days. The antibiotic and the sulfa drug will knock out whatever he's got. Now not only am I just his buddy, I'm one of his closest friends. Because he doesn't have a problem anymore. So we go ahead and we take care of that for him. I'm starting to become integrated into the unit that I'm with. Finally, we move into France. We're very lucky. We don't go on the first day. 3 or 4 days later, I'm moving forward with my group. And of course, why we're told to dig in before we go into the hedgerow country. Well, there's a lot of ways you can do that. You can use a shovel, you can dig with a bayonet. Mostly shovels are good. You dig a hole about 4 feet deep, 4 feet wide, and 4 feet across. Tune into a hole. It's nice, it's comfy. Well, you know what happens? The poor soldier has to use a latrine. And there's a way to do that. One, you can dig a hole in the bottom of the hole that you're standing in. That way you don't expose yourself to enemy fire. And then you can cover it back up. But guess what happens? It rains. And what's down that you've just buried bubbles up around your ankles. That's not good. Second method. These fine soldiers have helmets that come in 2 pieces. So they take the liner out and they use the shell. And when they're done, they scoop up some dirt, swish it around, throw it over the top of the hole and out, put the shell back onto the liner, and they're perfectly happy. The helmet was an all-purpose device. You go to the bathroom in it, you cook in it, you wash in it, you dig holes in it, you can do anything in it. You can make it a chair. But this poor soldier, obviously, is too stupid to do that. So he crawls out of the hole and heads for the woods. And the Germans see him. And Germans do what Germans do best. They aim and fire. They wound him in the leg. He goes down. What's the first thing he's going to scream? He's going to yell, medic. Because obviously his mom's not there to help him, and he knows it. He's down on the ground. I'm in my nice warm hole. I'm not getting shot at, but guess what? Guess who's got to go out there and take care of him? So basically, I'll pick up my rig, which consists of a yoke, 2 medic bags, in my case, 1 canteen, hooks on directly. Everything I need is in here. The yoke supports this, no problem at all. Also, I will place my helmet on, finally. It's supposed to protect me. The 10th Mountain Division, of which I'm a member, had a very distinctive medic insignia. Large squares with big red crosses. No other unit in the United States Army copied this design. So basically, I can be seen 1.5 miles away, which is what I want. I don't want them shooting at me. Unfortunately, even though medics were considered non-combatants and therefore were somewhat inviolable on the battlefield, over 2,000 medics were killed in the ETO alone, trying to tend to troops. In fact, 5 won the Congressional Medal of Honor for tending to the troops. Well, I crawl out there on the field, and this poor soldier is thrashing around on the ground, and I got to stop that from happening. So, I will reach into my bag, and I will pull out a little box, and inside this box is a morphine syringe. It contains 2 grains of morphine tartarate. Comes in a small syringe. I'll take off the top. I will push down on the pin to open up the needle, throw the pin away, and I will inject him. The injection is not what you see in the movies. Nobody goes, ha, jab. Doesn't work like that. What we do is we build up a little mound of skin, we slide the needle in, and then inject him with the morphine tartarate. Immediately after this is done, guess what's going to happen? Why, that soldier is going to see the little bunnies hopping around. He's going to see bluebirds flying over his head. He's going to shut up. Then I can tend to him. I will take the morphine syringe and I will pin it to his lapel. This tells doctors behind the line that I've already administered the morphine. Don't do it again. Morphine is dosed by weight. The average soldier is about 5'5" to 5'7", weighs anywhere from 130 to 165 pounds, average. Because of that, this dosage is good for 1 man. If he gives him a second dose, it affects the heart could stop, the patient could die. 1 for pain, 2 to put him out of his misery. It's pretty much the way it works. If I can't pin this to his lapel, I will dip my finger in some blood and put the letter M on his forehead. That tells the doctors behind the line, don't give him any more. That's good. If anybody sees my needle down here, try to find it. Now, the next thing I will do is, let us say it's a wound in the leg. I will tie a tourniquet around the leg to stop the bleeding. Then, I will use one of the devices that's in my backpacks. I carry basically bandages, morphine, sulfa drugs, cigarettes, and toilet paper. I'll take the toilet paper out and I'll wipe the wound down with it. It's very absorbent. It's more absorbent than a bandage. And then I can just toss it away. I don't have to deal with it anymore. Once I've viewed the wound, I'm not going to stitch him up. What I'm going to do is I'm going to remove his bandage from the little pouch here. I'm going to give him the 10 pills in there, and I'm going to say, look, you got to take one every 10 minutes. Because right now, I don't have the time to walk with you through this over an hour, and I know you're not going to do this, on your own. But what does a soldier do? He wants to get it all done, all over with at the same time. He'll take all 10 pills and pop them. If you've ever had an antibiotic and you've taken too much, guess what's going to happen to you? Within an hour, you're going to wind up with the worst case of diarrhea you ever saw in your life. And that's what can happen to some of these soldiers. I'm going to take the sulfa in a small packet. I'm going to tear the packet open. I'm going to dust the wound with it. Then I'm going to remove his bandage, the small pack. I'm going to open it up, decompress it. I'm going to compress the wound. I'm going to tie the bandage off. At that point, paperwork becomes essential. So, I'm going to reach down and I'm going to take out my medic's wound book. While the bullets are flying, I'm going to try and pull them away, get some cover, then I'm going to open the book up and I'm going to fill it out. His name, his rank, his arm of service, his age, his race, the date he was born, the date he entered the service, the location where the wound was, the date and the hour that the wound occurred, the diagnosis of anything that I've done, and any treatments that I've given him. I will then rip off one of these with the string. I keep a copy in carbon, and I will tie this to a button. That button will remain with him, and the tag will remain with him until he winds up getting either to a battalion aid station or a collecting or clearing station, where the tag will be replaced by a different tag. Now, when I'm done with this book, I have to turn it in, if I can find somebody to turn it in to. But I will then radio behind the line. Usually 2 guys on a Jeep come roaring up, or an ambulance. We get him away from the line as far as possible, stabilize him down. I turn him over to the drivers, the ambulance drivers, and I probably will not ever see him again. He goes from the line, from the aid man, to a battalion aid station. The battalion aid station is nominally a doctor, 5 or 6 orderlies, a box of medicine, and a tree. You're outside. The doctor will examine the wound. He'll take a look at it. Now remember, I told you that I can't stitch up a wound. There's a thing called gas gangrene. When you're wounded, not just the bullet goes in, but it pushes in clothing, it pushes in dirt, it pushes in all types of foreign things that are around you on the battlefield. So I cannot stitch up the wound. Now, there have been documented cases, but it doesn't happen very often. But once I've done that, if the wound is opening up further, I will take safety pins and I will pin that wound together. Because that way the doctor can open the safety pins and toss them away when he's done. And I won't get in trouble for stitching up a wound. It takes too long to stitch up a wound out in the field. It really does. So let's say he gets to the battalion aid station. The doctors determine at the battalion aid station that they cannot do any treatment there. He's too badly wounded. They're going to stabilize him as best they can, and they will use one thing to do this with, and that is called blood plasma. Blood plasma replaces the blood lost in the system. But unfortunately, blood plasma does not contain red or white platelets that carry oxygen to the system. So basically you're getting fluids, but you're not oxygenating the body. If we give you too much, and we don't get blood in you, you could literally suffocate in your own fluids. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to give him plasma, we're going to make sure he's stable, then they're going to place him in an ambulance where he's going to be sent to what's called a collecting station. At the collecting station, he's going to be put into a group of people who are wounded the same way as he is. When they get enough people that way, they're going to put them back in an ambulance and send them to a clearing station. At the clearing station, they're going to decide what hospital you go to. There are multiple military hospitals about 10.5 miles behind the lines, everywhere. So, if someone is specializing in thoracic injuries, they're going to send you to that hospital. If others are going to send you into abdominal injuries, that's another type of hospital they might send you into. But you're going to be transported back there. When you get to a field hospital, it's kind of look like what you see on the TV show MASH. Unfortunately, that is way too small. A field hospital would go from the road over there, out to the river there, and all the way back to the line of trees out there. Multiple tents, very large. Picture a tent city of very large tents. There, you'll be assigned to a doctor who will operate on you for whatever purposes, whatever type of wound that you have. They'll do the best they possibly can. If you can be rehabilitated at the field hospital, you will be. And then you will be sent to a thing called a replacement depot. The soldiers affectionately called it a repel depot. And you will be reassigned to somewhere which is probably not where you want to be. Most soldiers, knowing they would be assigned to these repel depots, would do anything to scavenge up enough equipment and transportation to get back to wherever their own unit were. You want to be with the people you trained with. You don't want to be with people you don't know. Finally, this poor soldier is so wounded that he can no longer take part. Let's say his wound in the leg is sufficient. We can't do this. He will then be assigned to a hospital in the zone of the interior. The zone of the interior, especially for Northern Europe, is either Western France, Great Britain, Southern Italy, North Africa, or the United States. If you're fortunate enough to be sent back to the United States, you'll be sent back on a freighter, a hospital ship. It'll be fairly well marked because we don't want submarines sinking these kind of ships. The Germans, for the most part, honored the Geneva Convention. They did not purposely shoot medics. They did not purposely shoot wounded soldiers. Unless, of course, they were members of the SS, which had a very bad reputation for this. But other than that, Germans were very good at what they did. They honored the Geneva Convention. Now, this poor soldier is too wounded to do anything. So they put him on a boat. He winds up in Brooklyn. From Brooklyn, he gets transferred to Walter Reed Medical Hospital. He comes out of the hospital with a limp. He can no longer be a soldier. But we do need people on the home front. So this soldier now, why, he gets a job in the shipping industry, welding Victory ships together, makes a ton of money because there's no place to spend it. We have no place to buy anything. And at the end of the war, he's fairly wealthy, buys himself a little tract home on Long Island in a place called Levittown, gets married, has 15 or 20 children, and lives happily ever after. That's the medical story. Medics were very important to Army morale. On the ships home after the Second World War, the medics, for the most part, got the best rooms, the best food, and the best locations on deck. The soldiers knew who had taken care of them during the course of the war. These people were more important than any general or any field commander ever had been to them. They made sure that in the winter, your feet were warm, that you didn't have trench foot, that you were examined regularly, that you had everything you possibly needed. If you had a problem, you could go to them rather than to a doctor, and they would usually take care of you. Medics were very important. Medics were the backbone of the United States Army. The United States Medical Department was one of the greatest uses of military personnel that had ever happened in the history of the United States. Modern medicine evolved directly from Second World War medicine. Prior to this, a doctor was a guy who birthed a baby, stitched up the wounds, and maybe set a leg on occasion. There was no such thing as medics or 8 men in the field. You were assigned to this duty. It was an assigned duty for an infantryman, and that's what you did. So that's the case here. Behind me, you can see quite a number of the different things that would have been in a battalion aid station. Being mountain troops, as I was, we definitely have to know how to work in cold temperatures. In a cold temperature, if a wound starts bleeding and freezes over, you don't warm it up. You make sure it stays frozen. That way the patient won't bleed to death. You must be able to work on broken legs and broken arms in the cold and in the snow without tennage. You need to know how to set up windscreens. You know how to make sure you know how to evacuate that person by tying sets of skis together on backpacks so that you can slide them down mountains and off the mountains. In Europe, in Italy, where the 10th Mountain Division fought from November 1944 to May of 1945 and suffered 47% casualties, the medics of the 10th Mountain Division devised a mountain tramway, kind of like a ski lift is today, that could move you up and down the mountains in your litters so that when you got to the bottom, you could be treated. This was the way we got people off the mountains. Basically what you see here is a foldable stretcher. Mountain and unfortunately airborne troops also got to use folding stretchers. It was easier to transport them. The box contains the medicines. The pump that you see there is a suction pump. This would have been used directly in a field hospital rather than out in the field. You need electricity to run it, and you have to have electricity generated. Everything up there, including the plasma, and most of the bandages, well, the plasma itself is not original, but most of the bandages and the field pieces that you see here are original pieces. So, that gives you a quick explanation. Does anyone have any questions? Anything at all? Doc, was that a good job? See, he's an officer. I have to report to him.
Now, did the other ones just have a red cross on it?
There were no regulations for what you put on your helmet. Helmets were not issued with this on them. The medics got the helmets and they put their own crosses on them, depending upon what their company officer decided was a good look for them. The most common is the 4-circlet with the crosses in it. The 100th Infantry Division, however, just used a red cross with a white outline around it because they didn't like to get shot. In the Pacific, the Japanese were not signatories to the Geneva Convention, and therefore their strategy was to shoot the medics first, because that way if you had a wounded man, he could not be treated. I've seen many films of litter bearers trying to carry a man off the field and the Japanese shooting one guy at a time until there were only 2 left and finally one, and he couldn't get the guy off the field. The Navy corpsmen, as they were called in the Pacific, did carry weapons, offensive weapons. But the only way an aid man in the European theater could carry a firearm was in defense of his patients in case he was being attacked. He could not take part in an offensive action using a weapon at all. If you were caught with this, it was one of the worst offenses and you were treated very badly as a prisoner. It was a very difficult thing to do. Well then, thanks very much. Come on up and take a look if you'd like.